been done. So today we'll be reading about the fundamental duties, like duties for who? Is it for the citizens or for the state to help understand how certain structure in the constitution should be maintained? And also we'll be talking about directive principles of state policy also. So directive principles of state policy is other lecture, but fundamental duties is a small chapter, so I have included both in single chapter. So please don't get confused with it. So we'll be understanding what are fundamental duties. So fundamental duties, it's in the name itself. It's a duty, but is it for a citizen or is it for the state? So fundamental duties are basically for the citizens. And initially, when Constitution was framed, the tomorrow, like 26th January date, 1950, these fundamental duties were not the part of the original constitution that was drafted. Okay, they were added through certain amendments, 42nd Amendment in the later, like 1976 period, they were added. So they were not initially the basic, the fundamental initial structure of the constitutions. So what are these fundamental duties is the central government thought it is necessary to incorporate certain duties in the constitution so that the citizens' duties shall be addressed and they will be helped in understanding what are their duties as being a part of citizen of India. Okay, they are being imposed. They just can't live just like that as they wish. But there are certain rules and criteria for them to follow. Okay, so the when the government thought that let's have this certain duties we shall incorporate for citizens to have certain duties to be being a good Samaritan in India, so they installed a committee which was headed by Swaran Singh. So the Swaran Singh committee came up with 10 or so fundamental duties, and they were incorporated through amendments in the constitution in the 51A, Part 4A of the Constitution. It was done by 42nd Constitution Amendments. So initially there are 10 fundamental duties, and the 11th one was also added with the second amendment to the Constitution or in the space of fundamental rights, which is first amendment in after making the fundamental rights. So the second one, the 11th one was added through 86 Constitutional Amendment Act 2002. So right now we have 11 fundamental duties. Initially it was 10, then 11th one was added. And also fundamental duties are not the part of original constitution that was drafted in 1950. So these three steps you have to remember. And why? Because these form very important thing while doing an MCQ type questions. And also in theory also, if you remember, well and good. Yeah, so this is what the basic introduction about fundamental duties are. Now next one, what are fundamental duties? These are also questions. So the fundamental duties, they'll give you an option, so and so are fundamental duties are not ruled out, because they'll give some fundamental rights in it, they'll give some DPSPs in it. So it is for you to understand, being a citizen of India, by heart the fundamental duties. So first one is to abide by the Constitution. So and respect national anthem, national flag, and the certain institutions which are inside of the Constitution. So I think a year ago or during COVID, there was an issue with the national anthem playing in cinema theaters, right? So then those things also the court has ruled out that the not everybody is at capacity to stand up for fundamental rights, because so the other certain uh, rule limitation to it was people, like not everybody has this physical capacity to it, so it ruled out the challenged persons etc out of it. So this, under this issue, the films theaters had to play the national anthem in the theaters, and this comes as a fundamental duty, and to cherish and follow noble ideas which inspired our national struggle for freedom. So, as being a citizen of India, you have to understand the certain timeline that you are living in. See, this freedom has not come to you. Of course, it was given to us by in a silver spoon or anything, but it is our duty as a responsible citizen. We should not forget the the issues. We should not forget the freedom struggle our forefathers have went in. So you have to cherish and you have to idealize those freedom struggle and respect as such, and to uphold and protect the sovereignty, unity, and integrity of India. So sovereignty, unity, and integrity means to not by any external aggression, and be India as a union of states, and also integrity of the country by not betraying yourself or defecting yourself from this region to the other one, and to defend the country and render national service when called upon to do so. Let's suppose in olden days, I think which still happens in the other parts of the nation, that as being certain eligible age, if there's a war, suppose there's a war, it is a part of the constitution that the all the young and dynamic young men should participate in the war, no matter what their background or no matter what they go through. So that is why, in if there's a position that comes to defending your country, you should be ready all the time. This is as rendering yourself to the national service and showing your integrity to the nation and respecting the values. Next one is to promote harmony and spirit of the common brotherhood. Yes, everybody shall be acting, or sorry, everybody shall be together, not fight among themselves, especially in the terms of religious, language, the region, and the diversities in between the same religion or caste, all such things which may affect the dignity of a nation. And also, you have to respect and protect the dignity of the women, and to value and preserve rich heritage of our composite culture. Excuse me. Now what happened? Now this is a very interesting, this is very important fundamental duty. If you go to any monuments, any heritage site, any cultural heritage site, we keep seeing the citizens spoiling the beautiful walls, or even they acting as if it is not my home, I would be littering all around it. But that is not as it is mentioned in the constitution. You should be protecting that space. You should be treating that space as it is yours. So you should not litter around, or you should not spoil any of the things. So it is your duty to protect and preserve such heritage sites, because it is what you project yourself in international space. Then to protect and improve national environment, natural environment like forests, lakes, wildlife, to have compassion for living creatures. And also, just like that, you should not litter the lakes, the you should not dump any hazardous things into the wildlife, into anything, and you have to protect the wildlife, because being a human being, you have the higher you are the higher creature. So you should make the space and the available facilities to the lower creatures also. This is you being as a born as a human being. This is less little part that you should be doing. Then to develop scientific temper, humanism, and spirit of inquiry and reform. You should have to question things, not just blindly follow, and you have to understand why is it as such. Question the things, find out new inventions, discover all those things. That's how the healthy discussions, that's how you can understand and analyze any issue, rather than just being violent or aggressive. The next one is to safeguard public property and adjure violence. Yes, of course, if it's not your property, you should not trespass. And also, the public property must be protected. Example, during buns and all, the RTC buses or any trains or any buildings would be destroyed. So that's the public property, right? So you should not be doing such things. To strive towards excellence in all spheres of individual and collective activity, so that nation constantly rises to the higher levels of endeavor and achievement. You should not make low of your nation in international space. You should not pull it down, rather push it for the further development. Then whoever is a parent or guardian should provide opportunities for education to his or her child, as case may be, between the 6 and 14 years. So this thing, we have compulsory education. We have also read it in 21A, Article 21A in Fundamental Rights, that state shall provide free and compulsory education to all children between 6 to 14 years of age. So this is one of the fundamental duty. Later it was made as a compulsory act or right. Now, what are the fundamental duties? Like, how do I define it rather than saying all the 11 duties? So, what do I understand from it? Are they similar to fundamental rights? No, because they are not justiciable in nature. I cannot go to court for violating somebody violating or some citizen violating their fundamental duties or not doing the fundamental duties. This is just has to be the morality of the citizen of India. They shall do or abide by their duties just so that they being the citizen of India. So if they don't abide by it, they would not be enforced to do it, but it falls as a part of them living in India. Then they are basically based on Human Declaration Rights 1948 of United Nations, and also fundamental duties are like for they are duties. Basically, they are duties for a good citizenship and encouraging good citizenry for the people of India, and also why it is not kind of not feasible. Like the language is also very technical and vague. Like they just gave up the huge lines or huge paragraph, does not abide by it. Like of course they are not justiciable in court also, so why do you expect a single individual to follow such things? Like, you cannot impose that morality or ethical thing on any human being, but it is the duty of an individual to follow such things, especially in fundamental duties, and simplify the language so that the common man can understand and enrich their civic virtues. So, fundamental duties are nothing but the civic virtues that a human being shall be following for being in this society. So, basically, what they should do is, as language is very technical, they should have toned it down so that a common human being, a common man can understand, and it would be easy for them to follow such duties. That complaint is what we have with Constitution of India, right? The language is very technical. It's a lawyer's paradise. Then how do you expect a common individual to understand what his duties are, what his rights are? Okay, what are the restrictions of the state? So that's what everybody should understand. The language is what the barrier between state and the citizens. Now we'll be that is what for the fundamental duties are. So now we'll be understanding or we will be reading the fundamental rights. So now what are fundamental rights? I'm sorry, DPSPs, Directive Principles of State Policies. So Directive Principles of State Policies are in part 4. Okay, they are from Article 36 after the thing, rights to the Article 51. So they are called novel feature of our constitution. This is said by B.R. Ambedkar. And DPSPs and fundamental rights together are called as consigns of the constitution. So I hope you should know the difference. Yes, and fundamental rights are for political justice. That is what we have read it in the previous lecture. That fundamental rights basically explains the political rights that a citizen has, or the restrictions that have been put on the state. But TPSP is also focus on economic and social justices. But sadly, they are also non-justiciable in nature, like fundamental duties. So you cannot go to court of law for somebody or state not looking into such principles. Then humanitarian and socialist precepts that aim for social revolution. So the DPSPs are basically nothing but principles that have been put in place which may encourage a social revolution, which may encourage the welfare prospects of the state, help in bringing down the inequalities, and by following a natural distributive system. So this is what the DPSPs are for. And MV Piley says that DPSPs are new Magna Carta. So the new document, set of documents, which could help bring the social revolution if followed upon. Now, part 4 of the Constitution, of course, they are made non-justiciable. What is non-justiciable means? They are not to be enforced in court of law. So, if the state is said to be have violated your DPSPs, or state, suppose the state have been not making policies on the lines of that, I cannot go to court. or you cannot go to court saying that these have been not followed. So that is what happens in DPSPs. Now, new democracy. Why? Because as the new democracy, this new democracy could not afford to implement such long principles because implementing fundamental rights was a Herculean task for a nation like India back then. So the constitutional framers, they thought that if DPSPs are also made justiciable nature, it would be very difficult for us to, for a nation, a newborn nation, to implement such things. Now central, and but also that doesn't mean that the governments can ignore or can act accordingly, as the citizens cannot go to court of law, so they can choose not to make policies around such principles. But that not is the case. It falls upon the states part to implement or make policies around such principles. Now national, there's been an addition, or there's been a study to it. It is done by National Commission, NCRW. This is basically, so what does this NCRWC said that this is a national commission to review the working of Constitution of India. It was done in 2000. So it also said that amend the heading of this director principles of state policy to policy and action. So not just the policy, you should also be adding an action so that the state as in the central and the state governments here, so that the states or the governments will try to do certain things as per it. Not just be them being the principles. If an action word shall be added, they can also be uh, pushing those things or working on it. Okay, that is what DPSPs are for. Now let us understand the characteristics of directive principles of state policy. So they are non-justiciable in nature. Principles are laid down in constitution. Of course, they are not vaguely set out. They have been laid down in the constitution since the beginning of the constitution. And positive directions. Now, what is positive directions? Fundamental rights are both positive and negative in nature, whereas DPSPs are just positive in nature. There's no negative to it. Why? Because it does not interfere with the functions. They are not negative, they are not restricted, they are all positive in nature for a positive development. So the DPSPs are also, DPSP means this Director Principles of State Policy. I hope you might have followed it by now. So DPSPs are of course positive in nature, and these principles are laid down in Constitution. So in a way, you can say that if they are laid out in Constitution, then it falls upon anybody, the state, to follow such principles. I hope you got the difference. So Constitution, as it is there in Constitution, as it is laid down by Constitution itself, now it forms the state's responsibility to follow such things. Okay. Then the yardstick to measure the performance of the fundamental in governance of the country. Now, what happens? Why are they called fundamental in governance of the country? Means, let's suppose a policy has been made. So the policy is, where do the government forms a basis to make any policy? So they'll follow up these fundamental principles only. Sorry, DPSPs only, right? So DPSPs are principles which are to be laid out for the state. If they are making any policy, they should look through it if they are around such principles or not. So in a way, they help in maintaining, or they'll help in improving the governance in the country, and which makes the states job easy. So, and also now next one is yardstick to measure the performance of the government. So let's suppose it's in the directive principle of state policy itself. It's a precept to decrease the gap. It's a precept to develop or reduce inequalities, or a movement towards a welfare state. So you can understand how better a government is following such duties and making policies around it. So, in a way, I can understand or measure the governance or the issue or the efforts that the current government is putting onto it. So, it's a yardstick to measure their performance and non attachment to any political party or ideology. So, directive principles of state policies are not like political manifestos. Political manifestos belongs to certain parties. Directive principles are laid out in Constitution. Now, if any principle that has been laid out in Constitution will not be any party particular. Right. So if they are not party particular, they are apolitical in nature. So they only focuses on social and economic issues, apolitical in nature, and they are not aligned by any party's agendas, any party's political manifesto. So it's a non-political principles. They are not political in nature. And also they do not go by any ideology. They do not go by any ideology which backed out by any political party. Now, next one, it lacks any classification by the constitutions. So this does not also basically been divided or classified in the classification has been done as a being a part in the constitution. Then ideals are enshrined in the preamble of the constitution. So DPSP principles are developed based on certain ideals which are mentioned in the preamble of the constitution. They are little expanded, the expanded version of preamble of India. So I hope you know the difference, because it also focuses on social justice, economic justice, social equality, political equality, economic equality, all those things that it focuses on. So these are to be termed as in the ideals or extended version of the preamble of the constitution. Now supplementary to the fundamental rights, of course, because fundamental rights are political in nature, and DPSPs addresses the economic and social aspects of rights to be pushed upon the state, so that they can provide such opportunities to the citizen. So they are an extended version, just so that they are non-justiciable in nature and distinguishable from fundamental rights. Yes, you can easily understand if once we go through, you can easily understand there's no similarity on the basis of that they help the citizens to evolve in the state through their protection enhanced or enriched. So they are distinguishable from fundamental rights. Now, the classification could be done in this thing: socialistic principle, Gandhian principles, liberal intellectual, and additional principles. Now, DPSPs, if you are talking about DPSPs, you should understand that DPSPs are divided based on the principle that the ideology that they have been following upon. So now let us understand the socialistic ideology, where the DPSPs are said to have been under the principle of the socialism or socialistic feature. So this is also very important for MCQs. So they'll give you what all principles can come under socialistic principles, or do they come under Gandhian principles, or do they come under liberal principles. So these are also very important for MCQs, and also they'll give you what is Article 39, what is Article 40, what is Article 41, like that they'll ask you. So you have to be very vigilant while leading DPSPs, because our DPSPs, there are too many, they won't ask question like that, you cannot deny such things. So first one is adequate means of livelihood for all citizens. Yes, it falls upon a principle of the state to provide that adequate means of livelihood for all the citizens. It shall not ignore, so it can only push policies in making such policies in bridging the gap and providing the adequate livelihood, and ownership and control of material resources of the community, and distribution for the common good. So common community goals, community distribution. Of course, this has to be a socialistic principle, right? So then equal pay for equal work for women and men. Yes, Article 39, again an important one, because they pay for equal work, and men and women. Opportunity to children to develop in a healthy manner, and non-concentration of wealth and means of production to common deterrent, protection of adult and child labor, provision for just and human conditions, and maternity relief. Yes, and elimination of inequalities in status, facilities, opportunities, and promotion of welfare of the people. Now, next one is public assistance to the old, unemployed, sick, and physically disabled. Provision of for legal aid, ensuring non-ideal justice for economic and other reasons. So these are all comes under socialistic principles. Now let us understand what are Gandhian principles. Now, before going to that, how do I understand? How do I divide such things as the Gandhian in nature or Gandhian approach? So you have to understand the principles or the views of Gandhi. with respect to the state. I think you might have read these things in Indian political thought, like what are the ideals or views of Gandhi's on the state, because Gandhi went for decentralization, and he said village panchayats has to be the central authority. Then he went for trusteeship thing, and he also went for the revolution shall start from the level, then reach the hierarchy up outside. And he also went by the philosophy of concentric circle, the horizontal circles. So all such things, if you remember, it would be easy for you to understand the Gandhian principles of DPSP. So first one is organizing village panchayats, then promoting cottage industries on an individual and cooperative basis, promoting with special care the educational and economic interest of the weaker people, then prohibition and consumption of intoxicating drinks and drugs which are injurious to health, organizing agriculture and on animal husbandry on modern and scientific lines, prohibiting the slaughter of cows and other mulch cattle. These are all the principles of Gandhi. Around six, yes, around six are there. Now, next one is liberal intellectual principles. So, taking steps to separate judiciary from executive. You should know this. Protecting, serving, and maintaining places of national, cultural, and historical importance. Then securing all citizens of uniform civil code throughout the country. Yes. So, basis of this Article 44, I'm sorry. So, basis of this Article 44, the UCC has been trying to change and provide a uniform civil code throughout the country for all the religious. Yes, and hopefully we'll see what's going to happen. So then providing free and compulsory education for all children below the age of 14 years. So this Article 45 have been taken. It is also part of fundamental duty. It's also for part of DPSP. So and also part of fundamental rights. Then safeguarding the forests and wildlife of the country. Of course, as a part of citizen, the biodiversity has to be protected. Let's suppose you, if there's a zone, the core zone or the peripheral zone, if you have been addressed to not to enter such zones as part of this principle in protecting the mother nature, so you should not enter such zones by causing disturbance to the other wildlife. Then protection and improvement of environment, yes, and promoting international peace and security. So this is another important thing in international space, that India shall be protected. India's uh, the respect shall be protected, and you should try to always promote peace and security and making just and honorable relationships with the other nations. So that is why we do not go for first war. So we mostly first try to protect or try to go for peace negotiations rather than disrespecting any other nation in the world. Then children are given opportunities and facilities to develop in a healthy manner. And this is also 42nd Amendment Act, and this is also added by 42nd Amendment Act, equal justice and legal free aid and participation of workers in management of industries, also 42nd Act. Then 44th, minimizing the inequalities in income. Then promotion of cooperative, this is another important one, 97th Amendment Act, promotion of cooperative societies, Article 43B. Then provision for the early childhood care and education to the children below 6 and 14, 86 Amendment Act. Then promotion and improvement of environment and safeguarding forests and wildlife. This has to be done by 42nd Amendment Act 1976. Then promotion of welfare of the people has to be done by 44th, has been done by 44th Amendment Act. Now first let us understand the differences or the similarities, or like how do I characterize the fundamental right from a directive principle of state policy. So if you are see the previous fundamental right, sorry, DPSPs, the whatever DPSPs have given the slides, these are important from the MCQ point of view. So in MCQ and objective, in objective type questions, they will ask you, does this belong to DPSP, or does this belong to FR, or does this belong to FD? So through those things, you have to remember like this belongs to so and so in socialistic principle or in Gandhian principle. But if you are suppose your semester exam, you should be able to understand or things, critically analyze the things. You cannot sit down to write all those DPSPs. Of course, you wouldn't remember, but very some of you would remember um, all the principles. So, but if it's a theory exam, you should be able to critically analyze excuse me, the characteristics, the relationships between fundamental rights and the DPSPs. Now, what happens in fundamental rights and DPSPs? If there's a question they ask you to write in your semester exam. So, if they ask you about the differences between fundamental rights and DPSPs, draw a table. You have, of course, you are writing the differences, right? So don't complicate it. Just draw a table and write fundamental rights are justiciable in nature, so that it can be challenged in law, court of law. Then the PSPs are non-justiciable in nature; they cannot be challenged in court of law. So that is a first basic difference. You should be able to say this answer if they wake you up in midnight and ask you, first tell us the difference between fundamental rights and DPSPs. First answer that should pop up to is they are justiciable in nature, they are non-justiciable in nature. Then fundamental rights, most of them are negative in nature because they are restrictions that are being put up on state. That's why they are negative in nature. DPSPs are positive in nature. They are not the restrictions that are put up on state. They are something, the principles that have been given to the state so that they can follow those and make policies around it for a better uh, welfare progressing state. So, and also fundamental rights are not absolute. They can be restricted. State can impose restrictions. We have read it in the previous lecture that fundamental rights, the state can impose restrictions during national emergencies. Directive principles of state policy do not have such constitutional limitations. The state cannot be restricted in any of the principles that have been given in DPSPs from following them. In fact, the states would be encouraged to do policies around such principles. So, state can implement them to a maximum extent so that they'll be able to understand if they are feasible or not. Then fundamental rights. Now, what are this? During national emergency, the fundamental rights mentioned in Article 20, except this 20 and 21, everything can be restricted or everything can be suspended during national emergency. But during national emergency, there is no such option as suspending the DPSPs, right? So then implementation of fundamental rights needs no legislation because they are mentioned in the part of constitution where uh, if they are not followed, that would be addressed as a void or ultra vires or violation. But DPSPs are the policies applied to the state, where the state can apply these principles in making such laws. So law which violates fundamental rights can be declared by court of law null and void. So let's suppose if any government that makes a policies which are said to have violated the fundamental rights, then court can straight away cancel that regulation, cancel that act, saying that it is against the principle of violation and this shall have to be declared void, otherwise. Now, next one, law which is contrary to any DPSPs cannot be declared unconstitutional in court. Now, this is another important difference. Now, what happens is I'll again say the other things. So let's suppose if any law has been made by putting fundamental rights in second place and DPSPs in first place, then that law can be declared as an unconstitutional. Because if there's a differences between fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy, fundamental rights shall be followed first. Okay, so in any law that has been made contrary to the DPSPs, that law cannot be declared unconstitutional by the court. Yes, fundamental rights are required for overall development of individual's personality. So that is what the fundamental rights are restrictions put upon the state to protect the individual's responsibilities, to protect the individual's protection. But whereas the principles of directive principles of state policy are basically for providing a welfare state and also overall development of the society. Then fundamental rights promote political democracy. Directive principles stand for social and economic democracy. So we can see the fundamental rights are mostly political in nature because they addresses the political implications on the state if they restrict the political rights of a citizen. So what are political rights like right to life, liberty, all those things which provide law and order? But directive principles stand for social and economic because they addresses the welfare policies, they addresses the uplifting of the individual. They try to bridge the gap between the incomes, and they provide opportunities for an individual to improve themselves, to uplift them in the society. So this is like the fundamental rights are political in nature, DPSPs are economic, and they addresses the social and economic rights. Now, balance between fundamental rights and directive principles is a basic important feature of an Indian constitution. So, if suppose, as I said earlier, that if there is a difference between fundamental rights and DPSPs in making a policy, the state shall must follow that it should not violate fundamental rights. But mostly, the states should try to bring not the conflict between the DPSPs and fundamental rights, so that the balance shall be maintained by uh, implementing both or following both fundamental rights and DPSPs without any contradiction. So now, how are these implemented? The fundamental rights we can see, sorry, DPSPs we can see they are implemented through certain features. So first one is implementation of RAND reforms, that is fair distribution of resources, and avoid unfair distribution of resources. Then establishment of planning commission. Of course, now it's Niti Aayog. Now, but initially, if we understand what is the main purpose of planning commission is to provide the welfare opportunities and to push through the policies and uplift the people from the below poverty lines and provide them necessary policies through such acts. Now, free and compulsory education, it falls on the state responsibility to provide free and compulsory education to the children. Then empowerment of local government, so that this local government will further look into welfare activities of the citizen at the local level. Then empowerment of women and protection of children. Yes, this is also could be seen in this principle. Again, this empowerment of women and protection of children is also part of right to equality, where the prescriptive discrimination was also done. Now, next one is protection of uh, interest of the weaker sections of the society. So the the fundamental rights, the state shall look into protecting the weaker sections of the society, so that discrimination that has been done, or discrimination if supposedly could be done by the other sections of the society, this shall be avoided by providing necessary policies, by making necessary acts or the laws, so that this weaker section could be protected, and the upliftment and the discrimination could be avoided by the at the state level itself. Then development of agriculture and animal husbandry. See, if we look through it, development of agricultural and animal husbandry, we do not see any about it anywhere else in the fundamental rights. So this is classic directive principles of state policy, that developing agriculture in a way would lead to better improvement in livelihood, which in fact would lead to better GDP of the nation. So in a way, the state is trying to provide the better opportunities or improving the livelihood of the citizens and provide them food with protection and their right to life. So all these things and also the development of agriculture would also lead to the policies that can help them achieve or improve their basic living. Then legal reforms. So these legal reforms could be seen in the prospects of lok adalats, the fast judicial courts, the mobile courts, because the original structure that have been provided in the constitution, it has been burdened out due to the more input and the infrastructure that is designed. The machinery or the people available were not enough to handle such inputs that have been coming to the courts. So for easy access and for a super early disposal of cases, the lok adalats have been established so that the cases which are small in nature, and while going to the court where the courts have already been engaged with such huge cases, this is going to delay the justice or more. So in order to avoid that justice delayed is justice denied, so that in order to avoid such things, these lok adalats, all these courts have been installed for this better reforms. Then labor laws also implemented that equal pay for both the genders. Then the providing non-hazardous workplaces and employment in such hazardous places should be avoided, etc. This labor laws, this International Labor Organization laws, which convention, ILO Convention 152, 153, where India is a partner to all such conventions, especially looking into the labor laws, providing minimum wages for the citizens and providing daily employment to them for bringing up them up, or providing them with better livelihood and providing them with employment opportunities. So that has been as a part and parcel of DPSPs. Now criticism. So the criticisms are very crucial. So now let us understand. Of course, there has to be criticisms to um, see. Not everything, every law that has been made or every part that has been mentioned in the constitution is not all upright. So the criticisms are nothing but the amendments that it still needs for it to have more better making space for a citizen to use such space. So now the criticisms are ambiguous and repetitive because they are, you can see them in fundamental rights, you can see them in fundamental duties, and you can see them in directive principles of state policies or any other articles, upcoming articles that we're gonna see it in. So it's always a sort of repetitive and ambiguous, means you have to read in between the lines to have, for you to understand like what is this principle about, what is this directive principle is about. So that in there it loses out its the authenticity and complicated meaning. It becomes complicated for a common people to understand what it is trying to say. Now it is legally deficient because it is not to be implemented or forcefully implemented in court of law, so it is not legally deficient. So even states, it just falls upon the state that it is not justiciable in court, but you should also try to follow that. So if there are no yardstick to follow up uh, on any institution, that institution willingly would not try to follow such rules, right? So this is a very basic human nature. So as there is no proper legal drawbacks or legal punishments to it, so the implementation would be little difficult. Then they are unsystematic in nature. They are unsystematic in nature because they are not arranged as per the proper implementation, or there is no alternative to it. Suppose you have mentioned them in DPSPs, but as they are not justiciable nature, they are not addressed anywhere else in the part of the constitution where the violation of such things or addressing such things should be compulsory by the state. So the important things which uplifts the social and economic background of the citizens are to be kept under a non-justiciable part, where states will not try to follow such things. It will lead to further imbalance, further irregularities in people's living and all such policy makings. Then highly philosophical and obsolete. Of course, the constitution has to be very philosophical thing, and when it comes to philosophy, it's not everybody's cup of tea. And now imagine you're trying to uh, help the common citizen or common man, common individual to understand what DPSPs are, like what principles that a state shall follow so that their lives could be at better off. So if everybody knows if there are these DPSPs that they have as a citizen of India, they can peacefully force them upon the state to make policies targeting such TPSPs. So now here what happens is the gap is there. Now citizens also doesn't know that what are their DPSPs are. Now state will try to smartly avoid such things in order to decrease their burden by making policies or implementing such policies. So this is how they are absolute in nature. They need not be forced upon to. Now, so these are proper criticisms of uh, DPSPs, and here it's the implementation could be seen in such things. Now the justification. So the justification is basically the conclusion that DPSPs are good, DPSPs are better off, but little changes could be done so that they would be more useful in uplifting the citizens' welfare. So here the justification comes to it as they are fundamental, supplementary to the fundamental rights. They are not something that what it is trying to say is the supplementary to the fundamental rights when they are not something that they are quite opposite of fundamental rights. They are fundamental rights are political rights and the DPSPs are economic and social rights. So all these three political, economic, and social rights are what the basic principles of the preamble is built upon. Right. So they form a supplementary guide to the fundamental rights for a citizen, for a state to follow up in bridging the gap and bringing the welfare activities. And it is backed by a public opinion because the DPSP is also non-justiciable in nature. If any state is not making the policies around it, the public have definitely voiced over their opinions in adjusting or analyzing the policies in line with the DPSPs. They are instruments of instructions to the government. So what happens is instrument of instructions is nothing but they are a guidebook. Okay, they are guidebook for step-by-step guidebook for a government to make policies which would be beneficial for the citizens. So now if government, suppose any government sat down to make any policy, now what policy they should be addressing? So they could be making it on any policy which could be beneficial to them also. So if they sit down, so they can look through the blueprint that has been provided to them through DPSPs. Okay, now as being a state, I should look through these principles and make any certain policies as per such the instructions that have been given to me. Now it is educative value. This also helps citizen to understand the certain principles that the state has to abide by and also their duties as a citizen, which have been mentioned in the fundamental rights. Then ambiguity of the principles is a blessing in disguise. So the principles, the PSPs are ambiguous in nature. They are not wide openly spread out. So you have to understand and also the state shall improvise in making the welfare policies and it's also a yardstick for measuring the worth of the government. So you can also address like this line says that you can also look through the state policies and see that if they are in line with the DPSPs or not. Then you can understand this state has been really trying to make the welfare policies or trying to make the better policies so that the citizens could be at advantage of. So this are also could be used as a blueprint, instrument of instructions, and a site of certain instruments for measuring the worth and the progress of the government through how through their governance techniques are to be followed in this through DPSPs. So these are all the basic understanding of fundamental rights and DPSPs. Sorry, fundamental duties and DPSPs. Fundamental rights we have read it in previous lecture. So this is what we have read today. The possible questions will be they won't ask you to write all the fundamental duties or all the DPSPs. They'll ask you to justify or give a or your note on what are fundamental duties and how do you justify them. So you can write their evolution, then you can say that so and so are fundamental duties, and they can help you understand. Then you can write the difference between a fundamental duty and a fundamental right, and also fundamental duty and DPSPs. Then you can say that okay, they are duties for a fundamental good for duties for the good citizens to be followed upon in India, if being a citizen of India. And the negatives or the drawbacks is very easy. That language is difficult, it's very ambiguous in nature, difficult to follow, understand by a common human being, and also they are not justiciable in nature. This is how you can approach the fundamental duties answer. Then in DPSPs, you can understand the more possible question would be like differences between fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy, or the other question would be justify. Let's suppose if there's a conflict between fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy, so justify for the state which one should be followed. So that is another possible question. Also, they'll ask you write the characteristics of fundamental rights and characteristics of DPSPs. Then, if they ask you to write the characteristics of DPSPs or per se anything like any policy that they gave, uh, example, this one. Let's example, they'll say, write the socialistic principles that have been avoided. How do I say that this has been mentioned in the socialistic feature of the fundamental rights, or Gandhian feature of the constitution, or liberal feature of the constitution? Then you can add on such articles as such. But I don't think that level could be asked here. So because this is just a semester exam, and that too you are in third year, right? So but it's always important for you to um, read in between the topics and combine two or three topics and develop an answer. Now, the other question would be they'd ask you characteristics of the DPSPs. Then you can write the limitations and their applicability. Yes, that is also an important question. Then you have to remember this DPSPs from um, MCQ point of view. If you are writing a competitive exams, they are very important. But in theory, you have to understand or analyze how far, how better can balance your answer by analyzing fundamental rights and the TPSPs and both of their limitations and both of their positive and negative traits. Then implementations could be seen like the DPSP. If another question would be like, where do I see the implementation of directive principles of state policy? Has the state followed the directive principles of state policy through any of such implementation, or in real life they're gonna ask you? So you can mention all these things where the state has followed or implemented the DPSPs as such, or followed that rule book as such, that instruments of instructions book. And criticisms are basic for fundamental rights and duties. Then justification also, like you are saying that there are certain limitations to DPSPs, but also you justify them, saying that indeed they are important, just so that they are non-justiciable in nature, and just so that no pressure has been built upon the state to compulsorily follow those, but they are still justiciable and they are still important because they are supplementary to it, and states will definitely look through this rule book in making any policies as such. So you cannot deny totally on the basis of the justiciability and non-justiciability of this important DPSPs, because the forefathers, constitutional forefathers, were not just they did not just sat down vaguely to add such huge part just so that they will keep it because it looks fancy. No, it was not added for that purpose. So this is what today's lecture is about: FDs and fundamental duties and directive principles of state policy. So there's 4 minutes left, and can I have questions if you want to ask, or we can see it in next class. So I hope I'm clear with today's lecture for everybody else. So you now, by these two lectures, you might be able to understand the fundamental rights and their characteristics, limitations and approachability, fundamental duties, characteristics, limitations and approachability, DPSP's characteristics, limitations and approachability. So you should be able to write an answer if three also have been asked, and go through this slides again. So see you in next class.